and jump on here and we will get started with some introductions. Welcome everyone this afternoon to Tools for Everyone. This is a training that we offer about universal support strategies for positive behavior support. Welcome again. My name is Brandy Allen. I am the Positive Supports Consultant Lead for the North region within the state. We serve agencies and organizations who work with those who have developmental or intellectual disabilities. And we focus on tools of choice training, which is a positive behavior support curriculum. I would love to hear where you all are from. That kind of helps me know what to share with you all, what is going to be relevant for you. So the way that today's training will work is you can communicate and participate in the training through the chat box. If everyone wouldn't mind putting your name, your agency, and your role in the chat box, that would be helpful for me. And there is a little bit of a lag when we type either on the slide or on the chat box, so just know that. You all may be typing away, but it doesn't pop up on my end for just a minute. I'm waiting on those to get in, your intros to get in the chat box there. The chat box is over on the left side. And there is a downward facing caret next to the word chat. If you don't see an open box where you can type in there, you would probably need to hit that caret and you'll see that chat box pop up. That is the way that we'll be able to communicate during today's training. I do ask that you feel free to participate through that chat box. I will be asking you some questions along the way to share some experiences and help me go over some of the material today. So feel free to use that chat box. All right, I've got Maslin Allen, who's a positive supports consultant at DMH. Welcome. Felicia from NMPRC. She's the Assistant Director of Nursing. Awesome. Welcome. Cheryl from Special Needs Services of Ray County. Welcome. We've got Cindy, the Dietary Director from NMPRC. Teresa is a Program Nurse Manager at NMPRC. Camilla just completed her final full semester of grad school for ABA. Welcome. That's awesome. Congratulations. Not currently with an agency, just here for tools of choice info. Very, very exciting. I hope you find this useful. And then we've got Becky Buckman, who is a positive support consultant for DMH. Well, welcome everybody. All right. You may also want to grab some paper just to take notes on for today's session. And also we do have some activities and practice activities that we'll do later in the session. You might want to have some notes for that as well. All right. So let's talk about what we're going to be focusing on today. We hope that you leave today's training knowing what positive behavior supports are. We're going to give you an overview of this universal strategies position. We're going to be going over some fundamental facts about behavior, as well as how to categorize behavior into 4 different types, and how that can help us target those behaviors for change by knowing what category they fall into. We're also going to be talking about coercion and punishment and what the effects are when we use coercion and punishment, why we should try to avoid using coercion and punishment. We're going to talk about 10 examples of coercion that we all use, but we should try to avoid. And we're going to be talking about how to improve our interactions and improve behaviors of others. So let's get a little conversation going here. When we talk about behavior, a lot of times we might say that we want to stamp out a specific behavior, which means to get rid of that behavior. Have you guys ever tried to stamp out a bad behavior or a bad habit of someone else? What are some of the techniques that you might have used in the past? And how did those techniques work for you? You can feel free to put that in the chat box. Just think back in your experience, either as someone who interacts with clients or as a parent, maybe trying to stamp out the behavior of your, an undesirable behavior of your child. Tell me some of the techniques that you've used to try to get rid of those undesirable behaviors. Welcome, Shannon. Anyone have an example of how you might have tried to stamp out a behavior, an undesirable behavior of someone else? I'm sure you're all typing away and that lag is getting me again. So Jody says that she works with a lot of undesirable behavior, and she normally tries to remove the attention from that behavior. That is a great plan. That's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, Jody. Thank you for sharing. Becky says she's used things like threats or taking items away that might be important to that individual. Camilla says that she likes differential reinforcement. So basically, not paying attention to that inappropriate behavior and giving positive reinforcement for other more preferred behaviors. Yeah, very good, very good. Those are very good examples of using that positive behavior support strategies. Teresa says that she talks about good behaviors and she praises them for those when they are practiced. You guys are already on board with what we are going to be talking about today. So thank you very much for sharing. I appreciate that. Let's go ahead and jump on in here. So in talking about positive behavior support, or PBS, the definition of PBS is to increase the quality of life through the science of behavior. The science of behavior or behavior analysis has been around since the 1940s. There have been hundreds of thousands of studies done demonstrating the principles and techniques of behavior analysis. There have been so many programs and treatment projects, school-wide PBS, training curriculums, all based around the principles and techniques that were developed through that behavior of science, or that science of behavior, excuse me. When we think about PBS, PBS uses that public health model to structure its interventions, specifically using the triangle that is demonstrated on this slide. My team that I work for at DMH focuses on the bottom of this triangle, the green section. That base represents those universal strategies that support quality of life for the entire population. In a healthy population, only 80 to 90% of people will only need these universal strategies to have a high quality of life. Now, if we move up to the center of the triangle, the yellow, that represents the population that is at risk for poor outcomes. These are interventions that might look like an extra scoop of those universal strategies. They're a little bit more targeted interventions that are intended to be short term, and they'll fade out as that risk decreases for individuals. In a healthy population, only 10 to 15% of people will need this level of intervention. And then if we go to the top of the triangle, the little red piece at the very top, that represents those individuals who might be in crisis, who need short-term intensive supports. In the general population, probably 5% or fewer people might need this level of intervention. Today's content during this training is going to be focused on the bottom of the triangle. The green section are those universal supports. We really want to express to you, these universal supports can help anyone and everyone have a higher quality of life. The strategies that we talk about today, they're not specific for any population they're really about the way that we treat people across the board. These are good universal strategies, good for everyone. All right, so if we think about using these good, positive, kind strategies, this positive behavior support all the time, it really is a focus on being kind and caring all the time. We want to make sure that we don't respond with coercion or say things that might create a worsening situation for someone. It also means when we're using positive behavior support that we are not providing worsening consequences or punishment for learning. We really need to make sure that we are focusing on what is being done well rather than providing a negative consequence when things aren't being done the way we want them to. So what can be really difficult about positive behavior support is that sometimes people don't understand that we can change behavior by focusing on the positive, and that we don't necessarily need to provide that extra negative punishment. I'm sure that a lot of us have been raised in that way, that if we don't punish a negative behavior, what are we doing to change that behavior, right? Using that kindness and caring all the time, it really means that we have to keep our cool, that we don't take things personally or respond emotionally, even if they do hurt our feelings, or, we just have to take it not personally. And we want to try not to do things to get even with others or to try to hurt them back. When we think about that positive approach, a lot of people think that by not offering that negative consequence to punish undesirable behavior, that we're letting people get away with doing whatever they want. And that's really not the case. It's just recognizing that the way that you react to behavior can in itself change behavior, and recognizing that people respond better to positive statements than they do to negative statements. So it's really hard. It can really be hard to respond with that kindness and caring all the time. Even those of us who teach this find it difficult sometimes not to react with that gut reaction, that negative response sometimes. It really does take mindfulness to control how you react and what you choose to focus on and recognize in someone else's behavior. We even have, like in our society, like we have been trained to value that negative punishment or to see that as normal. It's in movies, in music, in video games, in our penal system, like in the jails with law enforcement, there's always that issue of that there needs to be some type of punishment. And adopting a positive behavior response means that we focus more on what is being done well rather than what is not being done well. So let's talk a little bit about behavior. Does anyone in the chat box want to give me a definition of behavior? Feel free. I'd love to get 2 or 3 responses. Cheryl says, anything that can be seen, named, and counted. I have a feeling that a lot of you are familiar with rules of choice. Jody says, everything we do is behavior. Yes. Haley says, behavior is a physical response to any emotion. Like that. And I've got Becky and Maslin saying that behavior is actions or anything a person does that can be observed and measured. Perfect. All right. Thank you for your participation. So those are all very good responses to the definition of behavior. Now, the true definition of behavior, which a couple of you had on that previous slide, is anything a person does that can be seen and counted. We often say that we put behavior to the dead man's test, which means if a dead man can do it, then it's not considered a behavior. Anything that a person does that can be seen and counted would be considered behavior. So knowing what the definition of behavior is, can you guys give me some examples of behavior? And feel free to type those in the chat box. We're going to make a list here of behaviors. And again, behavior is anything that can be seen or counted. Maslin says smiling. Get my chat box to work here. Jody says yawning. We've got slamming doors, yelling. We've got spitting, punching, throwing things. We've got yelling, singing or sighing. Those are good ones. Pouting, throwing a tantrum. Crying, that's a good one. Right, guys have got a good list here. Okay, so again, behavior is anything that a person does that can be seen or counted. If we look at our list here, Would you say that we have more positive behaviors or negative behaviors? One more in the chat box there. Yeah, it looks like most everybody agrees that we probably have more negative behaviors listed than positive. And actually, that tends to be the case when we talk about behavior, simply because when we say the word behavior, it has a bit of a negative connotation. And we tend to think more about undesirable behaviors than desirable behaviors. It is important to remember, though, that behavior is anything that can be seen or counted. And so behavior can be positive or negative. We do have a couple of more positive ones in here. Smiling is a behavior. Yawning isn't necessarily an undesirable behavior. Singing is not undesirable as long as it's done at the right time, right? Yeah, thinking obviously is not a behavior. I would question thinking on being an action that we could see or count. What do you guys think about that one? Would it be considered a behavior that we could see or count? No. I see one no. It could be a behavior. When we think about behaviors too, we also have to think about the context of where that behavior is occurring or how that behavior is occurring. And so things like singing, that could be a positive behavior. But if we said someone was singing in the grocery store at the top of their lungs, well, maybe that's not necessarily a desirable behavior, right? That could be a negative behavior. So we'll talk a little more about context as we go on. But you have to remember like when and how the behavior is being done and the context in which that occurs can help you decide if it's desirable or undesirable behavior. Thank you so much for your list, though. You guys had a really great list. We'll probably refer back to this a few times throughout the training. When we talk about behavior, it is very good to think about behavior as specific actions rather than categories. I know that we had one category on our list where we had throwing a tantrum. So the word tantrum is actually, we call it a big old category word. Because what looks like a tantrum to me might not look the same to someone else. And so it would be better to break that word tantrum down into more specific behaviors. Can you guys think of what specific behaviors might happen during a tantrum and put those in the chat box? So we've got yelling, definitely. Yelling, hitting. Yeah, the majority are already on the list. You're right. Kicking your feet, throwing things. Yeah. So see, we have all those behaviors, those specific behaviors that could be lumped into the word tantrum. That's what makes it a big old category word. We need to be careful when we're describing behavior that we are using those specific actions that we can see and count rather than using a category word. The example that we had on our slide here is instead of saying rude, we could break that down into specific behaviors such as staring, cutting in line, or saying, look at that person. What are they thinking? Yeah, so the reason that we want to be very specific when we describe behavior is to make sure that we all mean the same thing when we talk about and look for it. Um, it helps us explain more clearly what's going on, and it helps us to define more effective targets for behavior change. We can actually think about the strategies that could be implemented to change behavior if we know what that specific behavior is that we're looking for. So let's talk a little bit about those 4 categories of behavior that I referenced at the beginning. There are 4 different types of behavior lumped into 2 different bigger categories. So there's 2 types of desirable behavior and 2 types of undesirable behavior. So the desirable behaviors, the first one is considered significant. These are those behaviors that are important. They're often the ones that we're trying to teach someone or help someone do at the right times, or maybe more frequently than they do currently. These are oftentimes tied to those life skills that people need to have a high quality of life. Can you guys think of any examples of significant desirable behaviors? Things that you might want to target or focus on that are going to increase that quality of life? Feel free to just put those in the chat box. I have some comments in the chat box that my sound is kind of coming in and out. I apologize for that. I'll try to speak up a little bit. I'm not sure if it's WebEx or if it's just me having a softer tone of voice. So I'll try to make sure that I'm speaking loudly enough that it picks it up. All right, so an example of a significant desirable behavior, Jody says the ability to work a job. Yeah, so I mean, also included in that, if we were to break that down a little bit more, Jody, it might be completing a job application, being able to interview and obtain a job, right? As well as learning those job skills that are necessary to keep that job. Shannon says the ability to cook. Yes, that would be a significant desirable behavior. Following a recipe, exactly. Any self-care behaviors like brushing their teeth, showering, that hygiene, definitely. Those are significant desirable behaviors. Thank you for those examples. Moving on to the just okay behaviors. Just okay behaviors they're things that we want to see, but we often overlook them unless someone is not doing them. It might be things like walking versus running in public spaces, closing the outside door when you come in the winter time, or closing, the outside door, making sure that you push in your chair when you get up from the table, things like that, things that really are only noticed when they don't happen, but they're still desirable behaviors that we want to see occur. Can you guys think of any other just okay behaviors, things we kind of take for granted? Okay, Maslin, I was confused on your saying there for a second. Saying please and thank you. Using your manners is definitely one of those just okay behaviors that we often overlook, but we notice when they're not done, right? Talking could be a just okay behavior. Maybe we want to encourage someone to be verbal But if they don't speak, we notice when they don't speak versus when they do, right? Teresa says rinsing your dishes after putting them in the sink. Yeah, exactly. Things that we notice when it doesn't happen, when the food is all stuck on all the plates because they weren't rinsed, right? Very good examples. All right, let's move on to the undesirable behaviors. There are, again, two categories of undesirable. The first category is serious. These are the behaviors that cause real dangerous situations. These are things that cause physical harm to either oneself, to other people, or to property, or they could be things that are illegal. Can you guys think of any examples of serious behaviors? I've got elopement. Yes, for sure. SIB. Can you elaborate on that one, Camilla? Self-harming, for sure, is a serious behavior. Yeah, Camilla, self-injurious behavior. Exactly. Yep. It could be stealing. It could be that property damage, aggression towards others. Yes. Driving while impaired, that's serious behavior. Yes, you guys have very good examples of serious. Serious behavior does indicate that we always need to intervene because, of course, our utmost priority is to maintain the safety of those individuals that we serve and others that are around them, right? So if serious behavior is occurring, we do need to intervene. The other type of undesirable behavior that we're going to talk about is that annoying junk behavior. So junk behavior is behavior that is undesirable, but it's not dangerous. It's really just annoying. Things like burping in public, interrupting others, things like that. Can you guys think of any other examples of junk behavior that you might have encountered? Flicking fingers. Yeah. My son is a percussionist and he is forever tapping on things and it drives me crazy. So we've got talking. Yeah, like talking at an inappropriate time or an inappropriate volume, things like that. Chewing with your mouth open. I hear that one a lot. Any sounds people make with their mouths. Interrupting. Yes, that's a junk behavior. Rolling your eyes, also junk behavior. Clicking tongues. Yes. Defecating or urinating on oneself for physical touch from staff. That could be junk behavior. Depending on the context of how that's occurring and like what might be contaminated by that action, that could also bleed over into serious. Cussing, definitely junk behavior. Yeah, so you guys had some really great examples of all four categories of those behaviors. So the two desirable, significant, and just okay. And then the undesirable, the serious, and then that annoying junk behavior. So you always need to remember that whether a behavior is considered desirable or undesirable depends on the context in which that behavior occurs. Now, we've hit on this just a little bit, especially for the junk category. What is going on in that particular situation at that time, what's going on around that behavior can determine whether it would be considered junk or something else, right? For example, crying might be desirable if your pet just died, but maybe not so much if you're crying and there's no logical reason for you to be crying at that moment. That might be a junk behavior, right? So just remember, we always have to look at what's going on around that behavior to decide whether it belongs in that desirable or undesirable category. Also remember that those significant desirable behaviors are the behaviors that we're trying to increase. These are the behaviors that are going to help people succeed in their environment. Let's see here. Did we have any significant desirable behaviors on our list earlier? I think smiling could be one for sure. That's a significant desirable behavior. That might be the only one that we had on there that was significantly desirable. We just really want to make sure that we are recognizing those significant desirable behaviors. These are the ones that we really want to try to increase or get people to do if they're not currently doing them. These are the skills that are going to be necessary for their survival and success in any situation. For example, significant behaviors in a movie theater might be whispering so that only the person you're with can hear you, making sure that you stay sitting in your seat, making sure that you use the restroom as you need to. In the store, significant behaviors would be paying only for the things that, only leaving the store with things that you paid for and paying for things before you use them. So we always want to make sure that we recognize those significant desirable behaviors. The just okay behaviors, again, are those behaviors that are common. They're often overlooked. We take them for granted. We usually only notice them when they don't happen. Some other examples of just okay behaviors might be someone is sitting down quietly watching TV. They're not disturbing anyone. Maybe they're walking down the hallway rather than running. Using an inside voice. Taking turns when they play a game or smiling at you when you come in. Those could be just okay behaviors. Those junk behaviors are the behaviors that we usually spend all of our time and energy trying to stop, and they tend to upset us the most. Can you guys give me a definition of junk behavior in the chat box? Write down what you think the definition is of junk behavior. I've got a couple in here. Really annoying, but not causing problems for other people. Yes. Behavior that cannot cause harm to others. Yeah. It's non-harmful, but it could be annoying. Behaviors that are annoying, but not harmful. Yep, exactly. Unwanted, throwaway behaviors. That's a good one, Cynthia. All right, very good. So the actual definition of junk behavior is behavior that's undesirable, annoying, but it's not physically harmful to self, others, property, and it's not illegal. We often have to think about junk behavior being age or functional level typical. For example, a typical 8-year-old is probably going to laugh when someone burps or farts. They're going to burp and fart with peers, and they're going to think it's hilarious, right? But that's pretty typical behavior for an 8-year-old, right? If we have a 20-year-old who is engaging in that same behavior, that's probably a lot of junk behavior. Like that could actually fall into like some undesirable behavior that we need to target, right? If it's beyond that age level. So the thing to remember is that just because that behavior is typical for an age group doesn't mean it's desirable or it's any less annoying, but it helps us know that that kind of action is not unusual for the age group or the functional level. The idea of junk behavior can be very useful to us because it helps us prioritize our concerns and responses to that junk behavior. We can save our energy and our frustration about those junk behaviors if we really think it needs to be addressed. We can take it to a more long-term teaching approach, and recognize that it takes a while to change behavior, but we have time to do that because junk behavior isn't really causing any harm to anyone, right? At least not immediately. It's something that we can target, perhaps, but we know that we have time to try to implement that change. And again, we can also recognize that sometimes that junk behavior is just age typical or it's functional level typical for that individual. And that can help us know whether we need to address it right now or if we need to wait until if that behavior continues and becomes a problem. So let's talk about some common junk behaviors that you all have seen. I know we had some examples earlier of junk behavior. Is there anything in particular that gets on your nerves, a junk behavior that you have a hard time trying either to address or to not address, to not give it attention? Jody says crying. Yeah, that one can be hard because you don't want to be seen as being too cold if they're having an emotional response. But at the same time, you recognize that that can be manipulative behavior. Any other junk behaviors that you guys have a hard time dealing with, either not responding to or responding to in a coercive way sometimes? That chewing chewing food with your mouth open, that's a big one for a lot of people. Cheryl says always making excuses for their own behavior. Yeah, that's a good junk behavior that maybe you want to target. Cussing can be another junk behavior. Yeah, those are all really good examples. We're going to talk a little bit later about some of the coercive reactions that we have a lot of times towards junk behavior. And maybe that will help you to understand some better ways to respond to that junk behavior. Jody says that crying is actually something the person does as a pastime. Being yelled at across the room, that can be annoying, yes. Just remember that junk behavior is definitely annoying. We have a few more examples on this slide here. That cussing, threatening, they have not going to work or not being respectful, could be junk behavior. Slamming doors, screaming, name calling, saying mean things. I do want to bring up on this list, they have these two examples where they say not going to work and not being respectful. When we talk about someone not doing something, we are not being specific in describing the behavior that is occurring. By using the word not in front of a behavior, we're actually turning that into one of those big old category words. So if I was not going to work, what could I be doing instead? Do you guys have any examples? You can throw them in the chat box. What could I be doing if I was not going to work? I could be sleeping. Yeah, I could be sleeping in late. Any other ideas? I could be shopping. I could be I could be watching Netflix. I could be on vacation. There are a million things that you could put in there that I could be doing instead of going to work. So when we describe behavior, you just need to be really careful that we don't use the word not in front of the behavior. We really want to describe what is being done. So if someone is not being respectful, that's kind of like the example that we had earlier about someone who was being rude. How could we define not being respectful? What is that individual doing that is not respectful? Maybe they are calling names. Maybe they are not looking at you when you speak to them. There are lots of things that someone could be doing instead of the not doing something. So just remember that when you describe behavior, try not to use that not in front of the behavior and actually describe what is happening. All right. So here's the big question, right? Why do people have junk behavior? Why do people curse at other people? What could be some reasons? Just type in the chat box. Why might somebody curse at someone? Oh, it was done to them, right? Yeah, they're upset, they're mad, they're frustrated, their feelings are hurt. Yeah, they're going to express that emotion through those curse words, right? Yeah, maybe that's what they heard, and so they're going to repeat it. Exactly. They need help, and they use those words to emphasize that they really need something. They're frustrated. It's a learned behavior for sure. Yeah, there's lots of reasons that people could have junk behaviors. As we go through today's training, we have a special tool that we use to address junk behavior. It's called Pivot. We'll get into that a little bit later and practice it. But when you observe someone having junk behavior, a lot of people think that we are telling them to ignore junk behavior. And that is really not very effective. So the tool that we are going to go over, that pivot tool, can really help you be more effective than ignoring. Using that pivot tool can really help turn around the junk behavior, because junk behavior a lot of times is for attention, right? And so in using that pivot tool, we're not taking our attention away from the individual. We're just taking our attention away from the junk behavior. So it's a very subtle tool. We're going to go over it in a little bit, but I hope that you'll find it useful when we do. It's always important to remember that there are reasons behind junk behavior. And if we can find out what those reasons are, then we're probably going to be more likely to change that behavior. And this is just a reminder that undesirable behavior is not junk behavior when it causes or could cause physical damage to oneself, to others, to property, or if the behavior is illegal. These are all considered serious undesirable behaviors, and we must intervene because the person's safety and the safety of others is our first concern. Those serious behaviors are dangerous, and they must be interrupted and actions taken by us to make sure that things are safe for everyone. So what should we do when we have serious behavior occurring or about to happen? There is a safety crisis plan. This QR code is going to give you more information about those crisis cycles and safety crisis planning. If you're unsure or you don't know about safety crisis plans, feel free to scan that QR code and you can get some more information about that. We also have another training that is done by our tiered supports team called Mental Health Mondays. The safety crisis training plan. It's actually available on our website. You can go and watch that training. And those Mental Health Mondays can help you with safety crisis planning if you have individuals who may need that. Another resource for you to know about is 988. This is the number in Missouri where you can call if there is serious behavior that is happening or about to happen. If you call 988, they can give you support and resources to help you work through that crisis. That QR code will give you more information about 988 in Missouri. All right, so this slide just again goes over those 4 categories of behavior, the 2 types of desirable behaviors, significant and just okay, with some examples. Some of these examples were ones that you all shared with me earlier, so that's awesome. And then on the undesirable side, we have the serious behaviors and the junk behaviors again, with some examples. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our fundamental facts that can help us understand behavior. The first fact here, the behavior is always right, given the person's environment or history. This basically means that we are probably going to behave in the same way, given our particular environment and our history. We have to make efforts to understand that a person is not willfully doing something against us or to be bad. They've learned to do the behaviors they do from their experiences, from watching others do them. They're telling us that something is wrong in their world and life, and we have to understand that. And we need to be teaching, modeling, and encouraging more desirable behaviors. Those behaviors that a person has communicate what they have learned to do to get what they need. And we need to recognize that. Almost all of the behaviors that we're concerned about come because of that learning or experience of a person. Some of those behaviors are automatic, like we all breathe, we all digest our food. Those are things that just happen automatically. We have to have the understanding and approach that behaviors can also come from that environment, from the learning and history of that person. And the more that we can know about those things, the more we can do to help that person change their behaviors in the future. If we have that approach and we use positive ways to change behavior, we have a much better chance of success. You guys agree with that one? That behavior is always correct? I see a couple yeses in there. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's good to remember that behavior is a lot of times just someone simply communicating what their needs are. And they're doing that in the ways that they have learned from their life history and experiences. All right. So our second fundamental fact is that consequences, meaning anything that occurs after a behavior, can strengthen or weaken that behavior. And the only way to know the effects of a consequence are by what happens to that behavior in the future. We talk about consequences. We mentioned this earlier about how sometimes we have negative consequences and sometimes we have positive consequences. We can offer either. But the only way that we can know when a consequence is working is by what happens to that behavior after we've offered that positive or negative consequence. Yeah, Jody definitely says that it's communicating an unmet need, right? Behavior is always communicating an unmet need. All right. Let's see here. So the purpose of going over the consequences is that we need to understand what consequences a person will work to obtain, like to meet the expectation. What is valuable enough to that individual to allow them to meet the expectation that's set forth? And hopefully we are offering the right positive consequences to get that individual to work towards that desired behavior and earn that positive consequence. But it's a lot of trial and error, and it takes time. That's our next fundamental fact, that it takes time for changes in the environment to change behavior. We have to be consistent, patient, and when we implement a plan, we should try to keep that plan going for at least a couple of weeks to see if it's working. Remember, the only way that we can know if that consequence is working is if it changed the behavior. Well, it takes time for us to see if that behavior changed. So we want to make sure we implement that plan for at least a couple of weeks. If we can collect some data around that and whether that behavior that we've targeted is changing, even better. If it's working, keep doing it. If it's not, you probably want to tweak your plan and try again. Right. So fundamental fact number 4, I love this one. Past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. Remember past experiences. If it didn't work the last time, you want to change the strategy. And we want to try to anticipate problems and prevent them. I love this one, and I use this example a lot of past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. We are all creatures of habit. We do what is comfortable and what we have learned to do. I will tell you that I drive the same route to work every single day. I will tell you that when I'm in a class, I sit in the same seat because it's comfortable. It feels uncomfortable to get out of your comfort zone, right? And so that past behavior being the best predictor of future behavior is so, so true. So remember that it takes time and it's uncomfortable to change our behavior. So we need to recognize that when we're trying to target changing someone else's behavior. All right, our fundamental fact number 5 is that giving negative or coercive punishment or punishing consequences typically results in many problems, including more undesirable behaviors. We should try to avoid using negative, coercive, and punishing consequences as much as we can. We should be focusing more on what is being done well rather than what is not being done well. Fundamental fact number 6. In the long run, behavior responds better to positive consequences. This is what I just said. We should be recognizing those desirable behaviors and providing positive consequences as often as possible. We're going to talk a little bit more about coercion in just a few minutes and those effects of coercion. But just an example, has anyone ever worked for a demanding and negative boss? Of course, that wouldn't be the person you work for now. But did you like it? Did you work as hard as you could for that demanding and negative boss? If you have a comparison of a better boss who was more positive and encouraging, which one did you give your best effort for? Was it the more positive, encouraging one, or was it the demanding boss? And you can feel free to put that in the chat box if you'd like. I know I can guarantee that I enjoy working for a more positive, encouraging boss a whole lot more than those who were demanding and negative. All right. So let's go ahead and move on here. We're going to be talking about using that universal positive approach and how that can set the foundation for all the interventions that we might need to put in place. Remember, it's not about trying to fix people. It's about trying to increase their quality of life. So to effectively change behaviors, we need to always be teaching, finding, and paying more attention to desirable behaviors instead of undesirable behaviors. That is the very basis of positive behavior support. We're going to be putting our focus on what is being done well rather than undesirable behaviors. So let's talk a little bit about target behaviors. These are those behaviors that you want to teach, that you want to increase, or you want to replace undesirable behaviors. We want to put our focus on the desirable alternative behaviors. We call it to-do language. So remember earlier I said we talk about stamping out undesirable behaviors. Well, instead of just getting rid of an undesirable behavior, what do we want to replace that behavior with? Instead of the undesirable, what is the desirable? We want to make sure that we let people know what that is. We want to strengthen and increase those desirable behaviors. And in doing so, in recognizing those desirable behaviors, we are going to weaken and decrease those undesirable behaviors. So when we want to motivate desirable behavior, again, we talked about this earlier, that sometimes when we put the focus on these positive practices, people don't understand that we're not letting people get away with things if we don't punish them. We're actually focusing on putting more emphasis on those desirable and healthy behaviors. We are putting our emotion and our words and our reactions and attention on the good things rather than the undesirable things. If we have to interrupt or react to undesirable behavior, we need to do that with as little emphasis, attention, reaction, emotion on that undesirable as possible. Try to limit your eye contact, limit your touch if you have to address those undesirable behaviors. I'm trying looking through here. It wants me to do some role play here. So let's say that you have someone who fails to use a tissue. Like they have a runny nose and they often fail to use a tissue. So instead of making a big deal about it and going, oh, gross, get a tissue. Oh, here's a tissue for your nose. Like that's calling attention to the undesirable behavior, right? If we were to react in the more positive behavior support way, we might just grab a tissue and say, here's a tissue for your nose, and go on. We are still addressing the undesirable behavior, but we're not calling so much attention to it. We do not want to focus on undesirable or inappropriate behaviors. Instead, we want to focus on the desirable or healthy behavior that we want people to do. Remember our list that we made earlier? and how the majority of our list was undesirable behaviors. We want to try to turn that focus around more towards the desirable and healthy behaviors. Again, it takes time to change people's behaviors, and it really requires a change in your focus while you're interacting with them. There is a great mindfulness that comes with trying to maintain a positive reaction to undesirable behavior, and recognizing that your reactions to those desirable or undesirable behaviors really can make a huge difference in increasing or decreasing those behaviors. It really is a true practice of mindfulness and how you react that can cause that behavior change. And remember, it does take time. You're looking for improvement, not perfection. You have to be patient and just keep doing what you know will work in the long run. So we're going to go ahead and jump into coercion and its effects. Let's see here. So coercion is typically a way that we punish others. It's either the use of force, verbal or physical, to create a worsening to stop or control behavior. So basically, kind of that negative punishment idea. Verbal coercion can be a form of put down or a show of disrespect. And usually when we use coercion, it's a habitual reaction. It's kind of a gut reaction. It's not taking that moment to think about how you react and how that could affect the behavior. We have a very coercive culture. Everybody uses coercion. We're human. We all have those gut instinct reactions sometimes. So we're not picking on anybody when we talk about coercion. It's a problem for everybody. But the more that we can avoid coercion, the better off all of us will be. The stronger relationships you're going to build with others when you can avoid those coercive reactions. But as I said earlier, we live in a society that has been built on coercion. It's very ingrained in us. It seems natural, and that's why it's really hard to change, and it takes some dedicated effort and continued effort at improving and not responding with those gut reactions. So coercion often means that we're trying to teach that individual by punishing them. And that hurts our relationship with the other person. When we use punishment or coercion, often we're not teaching the behavior that we want, that to-do alternative behavior. We're actually modeling, motivating, and teaching behaviors that we don't want, because people are going to do what we do, right? They learn what they live. And so when we use coercion, you're going to see those coercive behaviors from the individuals you're using them with. We're modeling that. Yeah, we need to recognize that this type of punishment, this type of, if you do something bad, I'm going to do something bad back to you, doesn't work to change behavior. And that's what we've been shown a lot in our society. And honestly, from the behavior analysis aspect, it doesn't work. Let's talk about our justice system and the fact that we have recidivism both in the juvenile justice and adult justice systems. We have that coercive response where someone breaks the law and then they go to jail. Well, did they learn to change their behavior in using that negative punishment? Obviously not, considering that 70% or more of individuals who have been in prison go back to prison. So that type of negative discipline system is not working, right? If we look at our school systems and the ones who have adopted a more positive behavior support approach, we find that they have better outcomes. They have reduced office referrals and suspensions, higher graduation rates, and better academic performance, simply by using that positive behavior support approach. So these are all really good reasons why we should adopt that positive behavior support model. So in thinking about fostering discipline, I know most of us think of discipline as like a punishment, right? Like discipline is usually understood to mean like a strict punishment or those negative consequences. But really, the word discipline is something that is taught. So math, science, English, those are all disciplines. If we're using punishment as our discipline, we're just teaching, modeling, and motivating more punishment. So we're not teaching individuals what we want them to be doing. We're motivating them to also be coercive. So let's talk a little bit about these 10 examples of coercion. These examples of coercion actually came from Dr. Glenn Latham in his book, The Power of Positive Parenting. And he outlined these to help people recognize these common coercive habits. This is not an all-inclusive list. This is just a list of the most common ways that people use coercion. And there are some other references related to coercion that you guys can look at that will be listed in the reference section of this PowerPoint. So let's jump into the first one here, questioning. Questioning is asking questions that you don't really want an answer for. They're meant to embarrass or make someone feel guilty or dumb. I think of it as like your kiddo comes in late from curfew and you ask them all those questions. Where have you been? Do you know how worried I was? Why didn't you call me? You're just firing questions at them. You don't really need an answer to them. Yeah, what do you think you're doing? That's a perfect example, Jody. Yeah, all those questions that we don't really want an answer to, we just want to make them feel bad. That is a form of coercion. A lot of these coercions put a power play in place with you above the individual. You know, you're asserting your control and your power over them, trying to make them feel bad. So the next coercion that we use a lot of times is arguing. Of course, that's trying to convince somebody that their point of view is wrong or why they should feel the way you do about something. And a lot of times when we argue, it's challenging that person's point of view in a coercive, confrontational way. The biggest thing to remember about arguing is that it takes two people to argue. And so if you can set your mind not to engage in argument, then there's no power struggle. It's easier. It doesn't hurt your relationship to just not engage in an argument. Oftentimes when we argue, there is no compromise. There is no changing someone else's mind or point of view. It's really just an argument is a situation where both people end up feeling worse. So it's considered a coercion. We should try not to engage in it. Usually, even if you do change someone else's point of view, nobody feels good about it. The third coercion is sarcasm or teasing. This is one of my favorite ones to use, where you say the opposite of what you mean, or you make fun of someone either maliciously or playfully. Um, the the concern with using sarcasm is that it's humiliating. Um, when we use sarcasm, we're saying the opposite of what we mean, but we're also making fun of the individual at the same time. So it can be humiliating. It can make their life a little bit worse, especially for those of us who work with individuals with DD or IDD. They may not understand that we're using that sarcasm and teasing. They may be taking what you say at face value. And they don't recognize they are actually making fun of them. So we want to make sure that we avoid sarcasm and teasing as much as we can. And I think that's really hard in our society because I think, especially in the US, we think of sarcasm and teasing as that quick wit. It's very valued. We see it in movies, we see it in everything, that sarcasm. And so it can be really hard to not fall into that trap of using sarcasm. But it really can hurt your relationship with others when you use sarcasm and teasing a lot. The next one that we have to talk about is force. Verbal or physical force is considered a coercion. That's when you either make someone do something that they don't want to do with your words or by physically making them do that thing. Once again, this is that power play struggle. You are above that person, making them do something they don't want to do. Verbal force can be loud and close. Physical force can fall on the side of abuse. And so you want to make sure, especially if you work with individuals who might have IDD or DD, that we are trained in safe crisis management techniques, and that we are only using that physical force while using those safe crisis management techniques, and ensuring that everyone is safe. So again, verbal and physical aggression. And when I say this, it sounds a lot more serious than it might look like in real life. An example that I have of verbal force might be telling my daughter to do the dishes, like do the dishes right now. That is a directive, but it's verbal force. It's telling her to do something that she may not want to do right now. Okay. It's disrespectful. It creates a worsening for her. It puts that power play in there that I'm above her and I'm going to make her do something she doesn't want to do. Another example of physical force might be putting your child in timeout. You know, maybe my daughter didn't do the dishes when I wanted her to, so I told her to go to her room and she didn't want to. So I took her arm and I walked her back to her room. Well, that was physical force. That was forcing her to do something against her will. That is coercive and it can hurt your relationship. Another type of coercion is threats. This is where you remind someone or you point out the bad events that will follow if they continue to have undesirable behavior. I'm sure if you're a parent, you've probably used this. Thoughts are often done on the spur of the moment. They're not thought out. And if you try to follow through on the threats that you made in the moment, a lot of times it makes your life much more difficult, because you didn't really think that through. You just said something in the moment, right? There are more positive and effective ways of reminding people about the consequences of their behavior. If we focus on the good things that might happen when they meet expectations. So instead of, if you don't get your homework done on time, then you're not going to get your video game time tonight. If we rephrase that, we could say something like, when your homework is done on time, you're going to get those extra 15 minutes of video game time. It's saying exactly the same thing, but one was said in a negative coercive way, and the other was said in that more positive way, demonstrating what happens if they meet the expectation. Right. Let's do, I'm probably boring you all talking at you, so let's do a little chat box interaction here. So let's say if I said something like, it's almost time to leave. You want to arrive on time. Is that a more positive statement or a more negative statement? So it's almost time to leave. You want to arrive on time. Is that a positive way to state that or a negative? Oh, I see a positive in there. Jody says negative. Felicia says positive, negative, negative. Maybe they don't want to be on time. That's a good way to say it. I would say that one is probably a more positive way to say it, because you're motivating them to be on time. So if we say it's almost time to leave, you want to arrive on time, we're letting them know that that is the expectation, right? That they arrive on time. Instead of saying it's almost time to leave, you're going to be late. That's reminding them of like what the bad thing is that could happen, right? Let's try another one. If I say, if you don't get in the car, I'm going to make you listen to talk radio. Is that more positive or negative? Yeah, I see a negative in there, some negatives. Yeah, that one is definitely a threat, right? Like if you don't get in the car, this bad thing that you don't like is going to happen. So if I were to say that in a more positive way, to motivate them to meet the expectation, can you guys think of a way that you might say that? Instead of saying, if you don't get in the car, I'm going to make you listen to talk radio. How could you rephrase that to make it a more positive, motivating statement? Yeah, Cheryl says that if we get in the car quickly, you can pick the radio station. Yeah, yeah. Jody says the same thing. Once we're in the car, then you can choose the radio station. Yeah, that would be the exact way that we could put that in a more positive, motivating way to meet the expectation. Very good. Thank you, guys. All right, so let's talk about our next type of coercion, criticism. Criticism is when you don't like what someone is doing or how they're doing it, and you make sure they know it. A lot of times when we use criticism, it is done in a teaching manner. Maybe we're trying to teach them a skill and we don't like how they did it, so we're going to teach them how to do it the way we would do it. However, that approach can often get you into a bad spot. It's really hard when someone says, no, that's not right. Like, let me show you how to do it the correct way. It makes you feel bad, right? And some better ways to phrase that when you're trying to help someone could be, I've got a suggestion that might help. Would you mind if I showed you? Or can I help? I might have a better solution. Or even, somebody told me the other day that this might work, and then explain it to them. So instead of using that criticism to let them know what they did wrong, you can phrase it in a more helpful manner, and show them in that more positive way. It avoids that coercion. You also need to remember that your tone of voice and your body language play a big part in whether what you say and how you say it is coercion. If I said the same thing, like, the other day someone told me this might work, that's kind of coercive, right? Like if I use that exasperated tone and I roll my eyes that's not going to go over well. But if I said it in the more positive, helpful manner, it avoids that coercive. All right, this is another coercion that we like to talk about, despair. It's when you say and act as if you don't know what to do, you're giving up, you're hopeless. Think about like throwing your arms up and saying, oh, I just don't know what to do with you anymore. I give up. Like, I do this a lot of times with my daughter. This is one of my favorites. When I ask her to do something and she refuses and refuses and refuses until I just give up and I do it myself. Well, I just reinforced her behavior because I gave her exactly what she wanted, which was getting out of the chore. But I also gave her a more coercive message in that she wasn't important enough to follow through with that task, to teach her how to do that task. I'm probably giving her a poor self-esteem because I didn't make her do that chore or that task in a positive way that let her know that she could be successful. So despair is not motivating someone to do better. It gives the message that you've given up on them, that you don't know what to do with them, and that you're pretty sure their behavior is never going to change. Despair can also make that person give up on themselves. So we really want to try to avoid despair as much as possible. Another coercion that we talk about is lecture logic. This one is my husband's favorite. It's where you talk about what should be done, you talk too much, or you repeat something that the other person already knows. This one can be compared to Charlie Brown's teacher. If you guys have watched Charlie Brown and you know that when she talks, it's that wah, 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 right? Like that's what your kids are doing if you're lecturing logic on them. It's going in one ear and out the other because they're not one bit focused on it. So if you need to teach somebody, you want to try to do it either before that problem behavior occurs again, but typically not right after the problem behavior has occurred. We want to keep our teaching short and sweet. We want to teach by example and model the behavior that we want to see. We're getting to the end of our list here. Taking away is another coercion. This one I think everyone has probably used or had it used on them. Limiting access to or removing things like privileges, possessions, access to phone, community, TV, money, and it's done as a punishment. This creates, again, that power play where you're in control of this person and you can take things away from them that are valuable. And it really does hurt your relationship. A lot of times when you use taking away, individuals don't necessarily relate their behavior to the item or privilege that was taken away. So it's not really teaching what to do instead. So this is one that we should try to avoid as much as possible. And also, if we work with adults, taking away can be an infringement of their rights. So we need to make sure that we're not just using it as a punishment, that if we're taking away from an adult, it truly is a safety concern. All right, The last coercion that we're going to talk about today is talking about a person's bad behavior while the person can hear you. Again, this is that power struggle. It's you above the person talking about their poor behavior. It creates a worsening for them. It can be embarrassing. It's disrespectful to say undesirable things about them when they can hear you. You're putting them down. You're being disrespectful. You're hurting your relationship with that individual. A lot of times in our field, this happens during shift change, when we're updating that next shift of staff about what has happened during the day. And maybe that individual can hear you and the negative things that you're saying about their behavior that day. We really want to try to avoid that as much as possible. All right. I'm going to go back to the list of all 10 coercions. And as I said earlier, we are all human. We all use coercion. But what are your maybe one or two that you know are your fallbacks? For me, it is definitely the sarcasm and teasing and the despair. Do you guys have any that you notice that you use more frequently than others? I've got a couple: lecture logic and criticism as teaching. Just lecture logic. I think that's a big one. That lecture logic, arguing, questioning, threats for my kids for sure. Lecture logic, taking away. Yeah. Lecture logic is a big one, I think, because we all like to explain why we're doing what we're doing, right? And we don't always need to. And I notice when my husband uses lecture logic, a lot of times he uses it as a way, like he uses his own experiences and mistakes to try to teach our kids what not to do. And sometimes they just don't care. Like they need to make their own mistakes to learn. And so they're not listening to what he says. Thank you for sharing that. Hopefully after today's training, you can try to avoid using those coercions a little more. Let's talk a little bit about the effects of coercion. When we use coercion, we say that it ages us. The individuals that we use coercion with will try to avoid us. They will try to get even with us, or they will try to escape from us. They often learn the coercive behavior that we're using. They're going to mimic that behavior. You'll hear them say the same phrases and words that we use. And when you're coercive with individuals, sometimes they'll behave less confidently around you. And I think a lot of times that is related to that power struggle. It's you above them. And so they don't feel free to be their true selves with you because they're afraid of the coercive consequences that might happen. Another thing that happens when we use coercion, especially if the majority of our attention is only given to undesirable behaviors, they might be relying on your response to undesirable behavior to get their need for attention met. And so they're not having enough moments of positive recognition, so they're going to get recognition for doing the wrong thing. So if you think about it, when are you more likely to be coercive or have a coercive gut reaction response? They've got a few examples here, like when you're tired, hungry, or uncomfortable, you've had a bad day, frustrated or overexcited, When someone else has just been coercive with you, when we encounter our pet peeves or that junk behavior, right? Or when we're used to using undesirable behaviors because of our own past experiences. I know that I am typically very coercive if I have had a bad day or if I am hungry. I just want people to leave me alone. And so I might respond in a coercive way. But it can be very helpful to you to recognize when you're more likely to have a coercive response. And that can help you plan and practice other ways to respond in the future. And remember that coercion produces short-term compliance followed by long-term problems. If we think back to that slide just a couple slides ago, people are probably going to respond in the way that you want when you use coercion, but you're going to see those other results. They're going to try to avoid you in the future. They're going to be afraid of you. They're going to mimic your coercive behaviors because that's what you're teaching them. So remember that when we use coercion, even though it works in the moment, it's not likely to be successful long term. It's not effective in changing behavior long term. So if we're not using coercion and we're not using those negative consequences, what should we be doing, right? This slide has a few questions that you should consider in making a plan about how to respond to undesirable behaviors. So if we look at the first question, we have what bad or worsening situation occurred that triggered the undesirable behavior? So maybe we have an example here that I'll share with you. We have an individual named Joe who ties a shirt around her neck when she's dysregulated or upset. When that happens, a support staff gets called, and sometimes she ends up in restraints. So let's see here. What bad or worsening situation occurred that triggered that undesirable behavior? Well, typically Joe has that behavior when she gets in a fight with her roommate, and then she'll tie something around her neck. It also happens sometimes when staff are really busy and they're short with her. Then she'll tie that shirt around her neck. So what payoff is Joe getting from these undesirable behaviors? Well, Joe's getting a lot of attention, including touch from that behavior. Sometimes she and her roommate make up after she ties something around her neck. Staff will rub Joe's back. They'll shower her with lots of reassurance. And sometimes the staff will take it upon themselves to repair Joe and her roommate's relationship. So she's getting a lot of attention and payoff from that undesirable behavior. When that bad or worsening situation occurs at other times, does she sometimes do the desirable behavior? And if so, what would that be? Well, sometimes Joe will cry and request to talk with staff in similar situations. What happens when she uses those desirable behaviors? Well, usually staff tell her that she has to wait a few minutes, which often ends up being more like 15 plus minutes. What do others get out of the desirable behavior? Well, when Joe's crying, a lot of times her peers will tell her to get away because she's being annoying. Okay. So what does Joe need to learn to do? Joe might benefit from learning ways where she can make up with her roommate, like apologizing for her part in the argument, trying to come to some kind of compromise with her roommate, or recognizing when people need space. What needs to change in the environment, including the responses and interactions of others, to prevent undesirable and promote desirable behaviors? What do you guys think should happen? Can you put in the chat box? What do you think the staff should do to respond to that behavior? How could they change what they're currently doing so that maybe that payoff isn't quite as big for Joe? Yeah, Felicia says give her less attention, for sure. Jody says don't give attention to the behavior, just help fix the shirt without comment. Yeah, that could be a good example. Yeah, like maybe taking away the garment and until she's calm. Not giving her all of that attention and rubbing her back and all of that when she's having the undesirable behavior. For sure, those are great examples. All right. Let's see here. So what else could she do, or what else could staff do to help her? They could build a more positive relationship with her. When she's asking for that positive attention, meet her need. Maybe not put her off for 15 or 20 minutes. Or at least reassure her in the meantime that, yes, I recognize that you want to talk with me and I'll be with you as soon as I can. Here are the steps to begin building a relationship with anyone. And this is, we promote this a lot in our Tools of Choice curriculum, that building those positive relationships with others will really help you change behavior. Because if you have a positive relationship with someone, they're much more likely to react to your interventions in a more positive way than if you have a more negative relationship with them. So the steps to building relationships would be moving towards the person and remaining within arm's reach, touching them if it's appropriate, make sure that, you know, they're okay with touches and that we're using appropriate touches, use a caring facial expression and tone of voice, have relaxed body language. We want to ask open-ended questions like what, how, could you, questions that are going to promote conversation. And we want to make sure that we use empathy statements. Say something that shows that you care about them, you could relate to their situation, or you can understand how they feel in that particular situation. And we also want to use encouragement. So we want to recognize what that person has done well, and why that's beneficial for them. We want to listen more than we talk, avoid reacting to junk behavior, and avoid being coercive. So the biggest steps to building a relationship are using these steps 6, 7, and 8. We call them OEE, so open-ended questions, empathy, and encouragement. Now, the steps to building a relationship don't always have to happen in this order. They can happen, you know, out of order. They could be repeated during an interaction. Some of them could be missed during an interaction. But these are the basic steps to build a positive relationship with someone. When we talk about empathy, we're talking about being able to take the perspective of that other person, and let them know that we understand. We want to use emotion words, and be a mirror reflecting those emotion words back to the individual. A lot of times those empathy statements start with things like, I can tell that you're feeling blank, or you seem blank. And we're going to put an emotion word in those blanks. We don't always have to agree with how that person is feeling. We just have to let them know that we understand that how they're feeling makes sense given their environment or the context in what has happened to them. Using empathy lets them know that their feelings matter to us. It doesn't mean that we agree or we approve necessarily. It just lets them know that we understand how they're feeling. Now, using encouragement statements is about being able to communicate how that person's own behavior has improved their situation. So we want to say something to let them know that we believe in them. We believe that they can continue to create more improvements in their life based on their behaviors, and that we are there to help them. So using encouragement statements helps the person learn the bigger lesson that their behavior can do good things for them. It shows the person how their behavior made their life better, helps them meet a goal, helps them live up to their life values. So for example, I know that you studied really hard for that test and you got a good grade because you studied so hard. You finished your chores early and you had more time to watch TV. Way to go. You might need to ask an open-ended question or two to find something about the situation or the person's behavior that will be or is good for them and will help them in the future. Encouragement is really about recognizing something that they've done well and letting that individual know why it was good for them. So let's practice this just a little bit. We have awesome Alex, who just passed his GED. He studied for hours preparing for the test. You're walking down the hall and he rushes over to show his score to you. If we were going to use that OEE, an open-ended question, empathy, and encouragement, what might we say to Alex when he runs up to us? Haley, the PowerPoint will be available on the DMH website after today's presentation. It's actually being recorded, so you should be able to access it. Yeah, so Felicia's got a good open-ended question for us. She says, what do you have there? So we might ask Alex, what do you have there? And Alex might say, it's my GED. I got it back and I passed. So if you were to give him an empathy statement, what might that be? We want to reflect back his emotion. Yeah, Cheryl says, you look so proud of yourself, with a big smile at him, right? Yeah, we're reflecting back how he feels. He's so proud. And then if we were to do encouragement, we've got a couple of good encouragement statements in here. So Shannon says, way to go, Alex. I'm so proud of you. And then Felicia says, that's amazing. You work so hard. Yeah, those are good encouragement statements. To make those encouragement statements even more effective, you could say something like, you studied so hard and you passed your test. That's amazing. I knew you could do it. So just be very specific when you give those encouragement statements. Yeah, Cynthia's got a good empathy in there. You look really happy. Congratulations. That's great. You must be so proud. Yeah, you guys have got that down. Very good. Let's try one more of those. So we've got scenario 2. We have coworker Carl, who you are walking into the break room with your lunch. Carl sees you, smiles, and says hi. And then he moves some papers aside and lets you sit down. So, how might you start that interaction? Just having a little stay close, positive interaction with Carl. If you were to use the OEE, an open ended question, empathy, and encouragement, what might you say first to Carl? Yeah, Cynthia says, thank you for making room at your table. And then you could follow that with an open ended question. How has your day been? Cheryl gave me all three. She said, thanks for making space for me. You look happy. What's new with you today? So she's got the empathy, the open ended question, and then she recognized what he did well. Hi, it's nice to see you. How are you doing? Yeah, those are all great. You recognize what he did well. He moved his papers aside and made a space for you. That's great. You could also extend that encouragement statement to say, I'm really excited that we have a chance to catch up. Yeah, very good job, guys. Let's move on to that tool that I talked about earlier that we use with junk behavior. Pivot around junk behavior. So we talked a little bit earlier about how junk behavior can pay off for an individual. Maybe they're getting attention that they need when they have junk behavior. Maybe they're getting you to comfort them. They just want to see your reaction. Maybe they get coercion, motivated negative attention. So they might see you angry or shocked or hurt or afraid. To get you to give in to them. A lot of times junk behavior can be that repetitive, can we go yet? Mom, can we go yet? Is it time yet? Are you ready? Let's go, right? Like they just use that junk behavior to get you to give in. They can also use junk behavior to make you go away so that you don't react to that junk behavior, to get you to do something for them. Junk behavior is just what people do, or it's a delaying tactic so that they can avoid or escape for a little while. So there are lots of reasons why people have junk behavior. Again, junk behavior is that annoying behavior, but it doesn't put anybody or anything at risk. We do have to remember that a lot of times serious behavior starts with junk behavior, and it can escalate to that serious behavior when others react to the junk. So remember the effect of coercions: avoid, escape, or get even. That's one reason why junk behaviors might escalate to serious behaviors. And sometimes, even when we're not purposely coercive, others experience our actions as coercion. And we can tell that by their reaction. So remember that responding to junk might reinforce junk. And the result would be maybe that junk behavior is going to happen more, or we have stronger junk behaviors because we inadvertently reinforced it. So if we talk about that pivot tool, there are three ways to pivot. Number one, when you use pivot, is that you're not going to react to junk behavior with your tone of voice, your facial expression, your body language. We're not going to say anything about the junk behavior. When we use that pivot tool, we can pivot to another person, we can pivot to an activity, or we can pivot on the person. An example of what each might look like: if you were to pivot on the person, you're just going to continue interacting with that person as if the junk behavior is not even occurring. We're going to actively notice what they are doing well, which might include their just okay behaviors. We're not going to give any attention to the junk that's going on. If we pivot to an activity, we're going to take something that's nearby us and we're just going to pivot to that. Let's say I have someone over here who is being very, very loud in their conversation. And rather than say anything to them, I'm just going to pivot away and I'm going to take a drink of my water. And when their volume has lessened a little bit, I'm going to turn back and I'm going to continue interacting with them, recognizing maybe what they're doing well. If I were to pivot to another person, it's kind of the same thing. There might be someone nearby that I briefly turn to and engage in a brief conversation. And then I turn back to the person with junk behavior and I recognize something that they're doing well. Ideally, you should pivot back to the person after their junk behavior has stopped for 10 seconds or more, and provide them that reinforcement, either for a desirable or a just okay behavior. You're going to repeat that pivot as much as necessary for as long as necessary, and you're going to try to stay cool and avoid using coercion. So this is an important point, is why shouldn't we just ignore junk behavior? Well, when we ignore the behavior, that can be seen as coercive. It can be a reinforcing reaction, and it can actually cause that behavior to increase into what we call a behavior burst. If you think about, I always think about like my kiddos at the grocery store when they're trying to tell me something and they're like, Mom, 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 Mom. Well, I was ignoring them. And so their junk behavior increased, right? Because I ignored them. When we use the pivot tool, we can actually increase the individual's desirable and just okay behaviors because we're recognizing those when we pivot back to them. Because we're not giving attention to the undesirable junk behavior, hopefully we can weaken that behavior. We can prevent that behavior burst, and we can prevent an escalation to serious behavior because we're not reacting to the junk. So if we do a quick practice on pivot, we have annoying Addie. Addie frequently picks her nose. She's telling you about this cool package that she just got, and you're in the middle of typing an email. So if you were to pivot on Addie's junk behavior of picking her nose, what type of pivot might you use? Do you use on the person, on another person, or on an activity? Okay, so Cheryl says she's going to use pivot on the person, and she's just going to ask Addie, what's your package? So she's going to not give any attention to the junk behavior of picking the nose, and she's just going to continue to have a conversation with Addie, right? She's going to ask that open-ended question, probably give her some empathy and encouragement, and just not address the junk behavior. In this particular scenario, you could also do a pivot on an activity, and you could briefly turn your attention away to your typing an email. And then after 10 seconds or so, when you noticed Addie wasn't picking her nose anymore, you could turn back to her and engage with her, ask her an open-ended question or recognize something that she's doing well. So those would be a couple of other ways to pivot there. We are right at about time, so I'm gonna go through and just wrap this up pretty quick. We had one last tool that we like to talk about, which is Stay Close Hot. Stay Close Hot is very similar to the Stay Close interaction that we just talked about earlier about building relationships. The only thing different about using Stay Close Hot is that when we use that OEE, we may have to repeat that multiple times to get this individual to de-escalate. Especially when it's a hot situation, like they're very close to like hitting the top of that crisis cycle. We want to try and bring them back down. And so you might want to think about touch and whether that's going to increase or decrease their escalation if you know that person pretty well. Make sure that you listen more than you speak. And using those validation and empathy statements in a hot situation can be so, so helpful. Just letting that person know that you recognize how they are feeling and that you understand why they are feeling that way. So that's the only difference to Stay Close Hot, is that we're repeating that OEE as much as we need to until that person de-escalates and they're ready for the next step, which would be directing them to an alternative calming behavior, a calming situation, or assisting them with solving the problem that got them escalated. And you also want to make sure that you're reinforcing them after the escalation, recognizing what they're doing well in that moment. All right. So just a couple of slides to give you before we wrap it up here. We do have a podcast that goes over those 10 common coercions. You can scan this QR code for more information if you would like that. We also offer the full Tools of Choice courses. Those can be signed up for on Eventbrite. This is going to be the QR code that'll get you to those events and the dates that they're available. And we also are offering family coaching workshops, which are 1 hour evening sessions that go over each of the tools in the Tools of Choice curriculum. These workshops actually occur twice a month. They're just for 1 hour in the evening, and there are 8 total sessions. So the next series for family coaching workshops will begin on July 13th. If you scan that QR code, you should get to information about those as well. Thank you all so much for your participation today. I enjoyed having you all. You were a great group. And I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, as I said, the PowerPoint will be posted on the website, and you can feel free to contact me as well. I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat box for you. But thank you all so much, and I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.